You're most welcome to our second episode of reproduction. I welcome you back from the first episode, and I would continue requesting you to subscribe on my channel such that we can follow these episodes till the very end. Today we are going to discuss forms of asexual reproduction, and among them I'll begin with fission, which simply means division of the parent cell into two or more daughter cells which are identical to the parent. If at all this happens in an eukaryotic cell, it's going to be followed by nuclear division, and this nuclear division can depend on the number of nuclei which are going to be formed, where if we want to classify our fission form of asexual reproduction. If at all two identical daughter cells are formed from the fission, then that is going to be called binary fission, very common in amoeba, paramecium, and it is clearly shown by the drawings that are on my right hand side in the video. It's simply just like mitosis, because in both we look at two daughter cells formed and both daughter cells are diploid. So there is a big similarity between binary fission and the process of mitosis. If at all the division results into formation of very many daughter cells, then we are going to call that kind of fission multiple, and it is very common in Plasmodium, where we term it as schizogony. One Plasmodia cell will repeatedly divide by mitosis to form very many Plasmodia that go ahead to invade more red blood cells so that they can reproduce at a very fast rate. The other form of asexual reproduction is common in fungi, called production by asexual spores. These spores are produced in a structure called the sporangium, held or supported by the hyphae. When this sporangium dries, tension builds within it, so it ruptures to release the spores, and these spores will find a suitable medium on which they germinate to form independent organisms. Very common in bread mold. And this mode of reproduction has its advantages and also shares some disadvantages. Among the advantages include spores being light, therefore easily dispersed. The other is small, therefore they can compact within the sporangium, which increase the number of species, then can remain dormant to survive harsh conditions, which increases chances of survival. And because of being numerous and being light, they rapidly colonize new areas as another advantage. Among the disadvantages shared by this mode of reproduction include containing fewer food reserves because of their small size. And this could be a big disadvantage because the food stores might get depleted before completion of germination. The other is wastage of much energy because very many spores are formed and some may fail to germinate or may fail to find a suitable medium onto which they are going to germinate. The other form of asexual reproduction is budding, where an outgrowth develops onto the parent plant, and this could later become an independent plant on its own. Very common in cnidarians and yeast. Cnidarians like hydra, it is very common. The other form is fragmentation, which so happens in organisms like Spirogyra. Here a parent cell spontaneously splits into fragments, and these fragments are capable of developing into individual organisms, all independent organisms. The ability of a cell to fragment is because of presence of undifferentiated tissues which are capable of regeneration. And this is common in algae, sponges, among others. Cloning is another method. Here we use, we get genetically identical copies of an individual through asexual reproduction because of the genetic information which is held within the nucleus of an organism. This genetic information can be used to generate a separate organism because it carries that information required to develop an entire organism. So when we are cloning, it is easier for us to clone plant cells than animal cells because plant cells are totipotent and they retain their ability to grow into new plants when suitable conditions are available, even when they are mature and specialized, unlike animal cells which do not retain such a kind of ability. So simply forming a clone, a clone is a group of many genetically identical cells produced by mitotic division of a parent cell, just like the way we've seen. Parthenogenesis is another. In this, we look at development of a female gamete in absence of fertilization. This female gamete will develop depending on either process of mitosis or a process of meiosis. If the process is mitosis, then we shall form diploid parthenogenesis, where a diploid ovum or a diploid gamete is produced, and this results into a diploid offspring. Very, very common in aphids, where they will rapidly multiply under favorable conditions. If the process is meiosis, which results into formation of a haploid gamete, that this haploid gamete will eventually develop into a haploid offspring, then we shall get haploid parthenogenesis. Very common in bees, and this leads to formation or development of the drones from unfertilized eggs. The other is vegetative propagation, where we have a number of forms of vegetative propagation like stem cuttings, which we use to plant cassava. We depend on the ability of the axillary buds to sprout. Grafting is another mode of vegetative propagation, where we use a scion, which is the plant with beta fruiting characteristics, and a stalk, which is a plant with beta root system for anchorage and absorption of nutrients and water from the soil. We look at another method known as budding. This differs from grafting in one way. The scion used is a bud, while the scion used in grafting is a shoot. So you put a bud onto a stalk, and this bud will eventually develop into an independent plant. The other is layering, where a branch of a parent plant is lowered into the soil until when it sprouts, and then we detach it from the parent plant so that it can also become an independent plant by its own. The other is use of suckers. The sucker will be uprooted, then planted elsewhere to become an independent plant. Very common in bananas and pineapples, use of suckers. The other is vines, use of vines, and these ones are shoots which are cut from the parent plant, then grown into suitable medium to become independent organisms. Here we use them in planting of sweet potatoes, just like you're seeing that couple doing it. And the scientific name of sweet potatoes is Solanum tuberosum. Apart from that, we shall request our learners to focus more on organs of vegetative propagation, which include rhizomes, bulbs, stem tubers, runners, stolons, offset, the root tuber, the suckers, and the combs, and I request my learners to at least make short notes about them. Reference here is biological science, which has many of these forms of, organs of vegetative propagation. We have some sample questions for the learners who have attended this class. I will request you to describe how variation occurs in asexual reproduction, what is meant by diploid parthenocarpy, and explain why animal tissues are not easily cloned. The other fourth question, I've tried to solve it. It requests for advantages of propagation or vegetative propagation, and I have talked about storing enough food, which increases survival of the plant. Then they retain desired characteristics in the subsequent generation within minimal variation, then allows rapid multiplication of the organism. Easy to propagate because it is easy to use the stem cuttings. Among the disadvantages, we have reduced variation since there is no gene mixing. Because of that, we shall also have a problem of spread of diseases, which is rapid. Improving traits in subsequent generations is going to be very, very difficult because of reduced variation. That is the major problem in this kind of reproduction, causing overcrowding due to competition. Which leads to competition is also very common. These vegetative organs are very bulky. They are hard to transport from one place to another, and the spread of diseases is very, very hard to control or to regulate. So another question I've also incorporated, I've requested my learners with aid of examples to use examples to give an account of the various ways by which plants may reproduce asexually. So I've tried to give you a clue about it, and among the solutions, I expect you to give me spore formation, vegetative propagation, where we shall have the natural forms of rhizomes, stolons, stem tuber bulb, combs, among others. I expect you to talk about the artificial mechanisms of producing plants like the grafting, the layering, the stem cuttings, among others, which I expect you to talk about. So that brings us to the end of the second episode, and the third episode will incorporate sexual reproduction in plants. I urge you not to miss this third episode because we shall have started to look at the real details of the topic of reproduction. I wish you the best, and I'm hoping that you will continue subscribing onto my channel to get to know the entire reproduction topic. Thank you very much for this session.